My name is Cynthia Boehm, and I'm a Cree Métis beadwork artist, born and raised in Norway House.
What got you started on your beading?
What got me started on my beading was turning 50. I don't know what it was about that number, and I thought of what I wanted the rest of my life to look like. And I always had an interest in beadwork. Beadwork was always a part of my community and my family home. And when I turned 50, I thought, I really want to learn. This is my chance to learn. And I had taken a moccasin making workshop with Donna Glover not long after I turned 50, learned to do the one needle beading. From there, I learned the two needle, and I fell in love with the art form because it's a part of my culture, my heritage, and I really dove into it. A lot of my earlier work was very contemporary until I was connected with with the old artifacts in the museums, and I fell in love with the old style traditional beadwork, the floral beadwork. For me, it's celebrating my culture, my Cree culture.
So, so obviously to your on your right shoulder to my left, the floral, that is an example of your work. Is that what you mean by the more traditional?
Yes, the right is my journey home honoring our grandmothers that I made for the Manitoba Society of Artists open jury competition,
Mm-hmm.
and that piece is is an example of the floral pieces, traditional floral pieces that I remember as a child growing up.
Okay. So did any of your relatives bead? Or did was it something that it was in your family growing up and you were around it and then you just kind of thought about it later on, or how did was it something that was very obscure and that you just hooked onto it later on in life?
Yes, actually, it was always a part of my family home. My great grandmother, Jane Mary Sinclair, used to make all our toddler infant wraparounds where we all learned to walk in those. She beaded our moccasins, our mucklucks. So it was always a part of my family home and a part of my community. My mother, I learned to sew at a very young age with her. I've always loved art. Art was always something I was involved in. My father was very creative as well. I spent time with him. He loved to sketch and to draw. So I remember as a young child drawing horses with him. And so I kind of, my childhood home, I saw a lot of creativity from both my parents. My mom didn't bead, but she crocheted, knitted, she made moccasins without beadwork, gauntlets, mittens, but didn't actually do the beadwork.
So just could you you had mentioned earlier that you had first learned to one needle bead and then you moved on to the two needle bead. Could you maybe explain the process and the difference between the two?
Okay. The one needle beading was first demonstrated in the workshop that I had taken, and I had trouble grasping it. And I learned from a couple friends of mine that are also from Norway House, and I watched them, spend time with them. I watched them bead. I did take a workshop with Janine Crouchy. She's a master beadwork artist, and from that time, I the type of needle beading I do is I stay with the two needle beading for many purposes. I find it much easier for myself to bead. I find my beadwork is a lot neater.
Okay, good. Um, so I know that you, of course, obviously your items include artwork, and then of course the moccasins and wearable items as well. Um, do you sell your items, or are they just done for your own personal use, family and friends, or where did your art progress?
It basically started out after I learned to make moccasins. I made moccasins for family as Christmas presents. And from there, I started sharing my work on my social media, on my Facebook, and I had a lot of requests to do some custom work. I really enjoyed it. From there, as I had mentioned, I wanted to learn more than moccasins. All the many pieces in the collections in the museums, and I've also come into some collections from the late 1800s, early 1900s that I was very fascinated with the old style and wanted to learn. So from there, I started working at it every day. Left my place of employment and started this full time. From doing that, I started entering markets, going to markets, and putting my beadwork image on clothing and accessories. And that's my goal long term, is to continue learning, to work with different garments, with beadwork images. Hopefully, once we can get out to public markets again, I would like to get out there again. But in the meantime, I do have a Facebook page under Cynthia Boehm Cree Artist, and I'm currently working on my website to showcase some of the works that I do. Puppy size, but I'm in the midst of making it because at the at the end there's supposed to be I have to do the yarn fringe,
Oh,
and it has the bells. And I actually met with one of the curators at the museum. We had a live Zoom chat to study for the opportunity to study some of the blankets in the HBC collections. So this was made to honor my new puppy.
oh, how beautiful.
Yeah, it's puppy size, but he'll fit it up probably till the end of the year.
Oh, all right, excellent. So let's talk about, so you started and it was your work originally, well, when you were starting was very contemporary. And so, how did you come across some of the inspiration?
I would have to say the traditional floral beadwork stemmed from finding my great grandmother's work at the Manitoba Museum.
Oh, wow.
She had some work commissioned by a missionary. Our family figures it's dated back to, the 1930s. And I believe there's about 9 items in the museum collections that were donated by the missionary at a later point, a later time. So upon finding those, my mother did talk about them, and she always wished that she was able to see them, and we just never did. And when I started teaching with the Manitoba Museum, teaching beadwork and moccasin making, I inquired with one of the curators, and sure enough, they did a search and they found all the items of hers that were donated to the museum. So upon viewing her works, there's 2 pairs of gauntlets, there's mucklucks, there's a beaded coat, a wall pocket. Um, I think there's some beaded vamps, a couple more items. Upon finding those, I realized how important to me the traditional floral beadwork is. Finding my grandmother's work was very special to me. I had the opportunity to study some of the works, in particular the beaded gauntlets, which my goal is to replicate them in the near future.
Hmm.
So upon finding them, it was like a part of her was with me at the time that I spent sizing up and studying the beadwork and studying the size of the gauntlets. It's very special.
I bet, I bet. Now, did somebody tell you that it was there? Or did you just really just stumble across it when you were teaching and happened to go look at it and realize that it was hers?
My mother mentioned it often. She heard through my grandmother. My grandmother passed away in 82, I believe. And my grandmother knew of this, and she told my mother, and my mother was living in Winnipeg. So she mentioned it on occasion, and we never did have that opportunity to even look. At first, we thought it was the St. Boniface Museum, and when I was connected with the Manitoba Museum, upon taking some workshops before I started facilitating some workshops there, I contacted Dr. Maureen Matthews, and her assistants located those items.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's just amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. That's kind of just very inspirational. It just is kind of uh yeah, fortuitous, I guess. It was just yeah. So okay, so was there any other items in the traditional sense that inspired you? You had mentioned some from the 1800s and
The items, the artifacts that really inspire me, things, they're items that aren't made today as they were. There was a lot of pieces that came out of my home community of Norway House, because Norway House was one of the fur trade central points along the Nelson River from York Factory to the Red River. So there was a lot of beautiful beadwork, silk embroidery that was produced in my home community. And throughout the years, I remember that as a child. A lot of the elderly women, you know, beaded, made mucklucks, made moccasins. It was always in my community. Um, Sorry, can you repeat that question again?
oh, so I just was, I know that of course there was your grandmother's beading that was inspirational, but you had at the beginning of our interview made mention of a collection from the 1800s that also inspired you. So I was just wondering if you could just
Okay,
talk a little bit about some of that stuff too.
sure. Many items gave me inspiration at the Manitoba Museum in the collections. I have a collection I came upon myself. As you'll see behind me, what was common back in the day was to decorate your home with beaded items, or items were commissioned. And as an example, was the one behind me is a mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Made beaded on velveteen and elaborately beaded. Another item that's behind me here that I have that is part of a pillow cushion, a pillowcase. That was very common. You see a lot of those in various collections. You know, I talked about learning the dog blanket. That's not very common today as it was back in the day. And those types of items really inspire me. I want to learn them. Another item would be a wall pocket where you kept your mail or household items in a beautiful beaded wall pocket
Mm-hmm.
that stored household items.
Okay, excellent. All right, so without obviously there's no place you can go to learn these techniques or whatever. You just have to really look deep into the pieces and just kind of try to replicate them or put your own spin on them. Obviously you've probably far outdone yourself in taking classes from other people, or do you still continue to take classes, or what is your process nowadays?
You know, this art form is you'll always learn. I enjoy various workshops. I take many workshops just because I know how to bead, and I know I've learned how to make, the wares, the moccasins, the mittens, the gauntlets, the mucklucks. You can never stop learning. To me, it's important. I enjoy the fellowship of mind-like people.
Mm-hmm.
I find it very inspiring. We all have different methods. Is there a right or wrong way? And it's learning. You're always learning, and that's the thing that I really appreciate about attending these various workshops that I attend ongoing.
Okay. And you mentioned also earlier that about an award that you won.
Mhm.
Could you tell us what it was?
Um, a couple of years ago, when I started doing beadwork, the first competition I entered was the Interlake Juried Art Show here in Selkirk, and that piece was the white moccasins behind me. And in that category, I placed second place for those moccasins. They were elaborately beaded, and as I remember growing up as a child. A couple of years later, I decided to enter a piece into the Manitoba Society of Artists Juried Art Show, and I from the Interlake Juried Art Show, I realized that there wasn't a lot of beadwork in these competitions. And the reason I do it, I've entered, is because I want to promote beadwork as an art form, as it's more recognized as a craft. But I always say this, you take your brush, your paints, they're an object, but when you create something from them, they become something very special. It becomes something very special. It becomes something that you envisioned, that you put on that canvas, right? I say that with beadwork. I can have tubes and bags of beads sitting out in front of me and my needles, but it's what you do with them that creates the artwork. So I always call it an art form. It's being recognized more of an art form today. And
Mhm.
when I entered the Manitoba Society of Artists juried art show, my intent was to just promote beadwork. And I was pleasantly surprised to place first in the competition, um, and it was very exciting. It was very humbling to have this piece, "My Journey Home," honoring our grandmothers, awarded first place.
Beautiful. Yeah. It deserves first place. There's no question about it. It's gorgeous.
Thank you.
Lovely. Um, and so what are you still teaching?
I am. I will be teaching workshops once COVID is,
Hmm.
once things become more manageable. I enjoy teaching the art form. It's very rewarding. It's very important to pass on and share the knowledge. It's for me. It's a way. It's how I celebrate my Cree culture. Is through the art form.
It's also a great way to promote it as an art form, right? What better way to promote it than to teach it and have it
Yes.
continuing on?
Yes.
Um, so you do this full time now, you had said, so you're actually doing it full time. Website, is there any stores that your art is in, or do you just sell it personally?
Um, I have been selling prior to attending markets. I was selling with the Heard Museum gift store in Phoenix, Arizona.
Oh, wow.
I was selling with the Manitoba Mukluk Story Boot Project, an awesome project for Indigenous artisans. And I do sell some of my works with the Winnipeg Art Gallery gift shop. Other than that, it was mainly markets, and I've done some custom work.
Okay. And you had said I never let anything go. You had said about the Manitoba Mukluk project. Could you explain a little bit more about that to us?
The Manitoba Muklek Story Boot Project gives opportunity to artists like myself to sell on it's online based. The artists receive 100% of the proceeds. You know, it's an encouraging.
That where so like are you do you have any additional um thoughts for yourself of where you want to go, or are you really just looking to just continue to grow your business and work at it at what you're doing right now, or do you have any aspirations for the future, maybe once COVID's done? Or yeah,
Mhm.
but yeah, where do you see yourself going, I guess, is the question.
My goals are to continue learning. As I had mentioned earlier, there's so much to learn about this art form. Um, to me, it's more than just beading. It's learning the history, um, celebrating my culture. You know, there's a lot of different methods that I would love to learn. I'm recently working with porcupine quills and designing floral work, and I'm really enjoying learning another very old style traditional technique. So I'm continuing learning. That's my long-term goal. Once my website becomes active, and once all prepared, I would like to put more of my beadwork on accessories and garments.
Okay. um so maybe explain to us a little bit about beading with porcupine quills.
As an example, this is uh, a project I'm working on right now. It's porcupine quill work. I'm doing a mask. This was prior to the trade of beads back in the 1800s. Porcupine quill work was used. The style that I use is the zigzag technique. I learned at the Manitoba Museum one of their workshops through Janine Crouchy. Very, it's a very different art form. It's something that I find I have to continually pick up. Maybe if it's once a month, like beadwork, you can pick it up and you always retain that knowledge. I find with quill work, porcupine quill work, you have to work at it to keep those techniques fresh in your mind. So every once a month, I'll practice with it so that I retain those skills. I've learned how to clean, how to dye them, of course, with commercial dye, but back in the day, uh, land-based resources were used, such as you know berries, anything colorful from the land was used, and those recipes that were used are long lost. So today, what we use is commercial dye like RIT to dye the porcupine quills.
Wow.
It's a
So
very interesting art form.
yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
I bet, yes, very.
I work with the seed beads. There's different types of beads out there, but I really love the seed beads in particular. Um, the old style traditional colors. I do have some antique beads that I save for special projects, and a lot of a lot of beads now. A lot of bead companies are, how do you say, they're going towards producing colors, the matte colors, opaque matte colors of the old style beads. I'm finding, a lot of beads in stores that, okay, this is really close to this pony trader blue color, this pumpkin yellow. So I've kind of researched some of the old style beads and everything, and I do work with them from time to time, but I I save those for a special project, because they're very hard to find. And when you do find them, you grab them, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
And which they're not in the bead stores today. You have to source them online, and find this. I've been beading for 4.5 years now, and I'm taking on bigger beading projects. But I find it's the time you spend on it. Like when I first started beading, I was beading. I I was intrigued. I wanted to know this. I wanted to know that. So I spent a lot of time practicing. Um, and I feel like I'm ready to take on bigger projects with my beadwork. I feel like I'm at that stage.
Mm-hmm.
It's just something I thoroughly enjoy. It's meditative. I feel a sense of peace when I'm beading. It gives me, there's so many rewards in it, um, in beading. And one of the things I love about teaching is I remember the feeling when I first learned to bead, wondering if I was able to do it. And then when I had the first pair of moccasins that I made, it made me feel really proud. And I see that on participants' faces in my workshops, and it's the most rewarding feeling.
Good, good, excellent. Um, so I don't know, is there anything else that you would like to share? Your favorite project to work on?
I would have to say my favorite project to date would be learning the dog blanket, being a historical piece. It's something new. I feel I need to challenge myself in learning new things. I couldn't even count the number of moccasins and mittens that I've made. I enjoy making them, but I have to say, making the dog blanket that I'm making right now that's in progress is really exciting for me.
The biggest project you've ever made?
Biggest project, I would have to say this piece was the most elaborate beadwork I've done to date. You know, with the dog blanket, I would have to say there's probably the amount of beading, but with smaller florals. So it's hard to say.
Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
good. And what was the very first project you ever did? Um, did you do small items, swatches, or did you just, are you a jump into the project type of gal?
The first project I made was my husband's moccasins in the moccasin making workshop 4.5 years ago, which he still wears today, and it's time for a new pair. But I jumped into that basically because the class was you learned to bead, you taken your project away, you learned the pattern making, custom pattern making, you took your beading away, and then you came back with finished beaded vamps, and then we were taught to sew, how to sew our moccasins and assemble the fur and the liners. But I did do some practice little pieces prior to beading on the moccasins that I first made. So I guess in a sense, I jumped right into it because I was so intrigued to learn. I was fascinated.
Good, good, excellent. All right. So I guess I always ask this question on all my interviews, and basically it's just like if there was one thing that you would want to share with our audience about you, about your craft, about whatever that you absolutely want them to know, what would that be?
I guess the one thing that really stands out in my mind and how everything evolved, um, it's never too late to learn. Um, learning this art form at 50, but it was always ingrained in me as a young child because it was part of my home and my family home and my community. And you never know what the outcome could be. Just take that leap in faith.